Lauren had always known that life wouldn't be easy, but she was never afraid of working hard. From a very young age, she learned to fend for herself, driven by the desire to achieve her dreams without relying on anyone. Now, at 28, she stood out as one of the city's most promising event planners. Her reputation was built on a combination of perfectionism, creativity, and tireless dedication. Every event she touched was transformed into a memorable experience, marked by flawless details and brilliant execution. Behind this facade of impeccable professionalism, however, there was a woman who carried scars. The absence of a supportive family network had made Lauren independent, but also distrustful. She had learned, through disappointments, not to expect anything from anyone except herself. Perhaps that was why she threw herself so much into her work, using her achievements as a way to prove her worth, to the world and to herself. It was during the organization of one of the season's most luxurious weddings that Lauren crossed paths with Connor. The groom's family had hired her company to handle every detail of the ceremony, and that meant dealing directly with the groomsmen, among them, Connor. From the very first moment, he caught her attention, but not for the reason that usually impressed people. Of course, he had a striking presence, tall, elegant, with intense eyes and a naturally sophisticated demeanor. However, it was the coldness contained in his gaze that really stayed in Lauren's memory. Connor Donovan was the heir to a financial empire. His name was synonymous with power and prestige, but he himself seemed uncomfortable with the weight of it. Despite his flawless image, there was something distant about him, a reserve that suggested that not even his family's immense fortune could protect him from certain pains. At 32, Connor was a man shaped by expectations, especially his father's. Richard Donovan was known for both his business success and the unyielding control he exerted over everything and everyone around him, including his own son. Connor had always known that to his father, he was nothing more than an heir to be prepared to maintain and expand the Donovan dynasty. His personal choices were secondary, his feelings, irrelevant. This had turned him into a reserved man, cautious about revealing emotions and accustomed to maintaining appearances. But beneath this cold facade, there was a restless soul, tired of living under rules that weren't his own. The meeting between Lauren and Connor took place in an environment of luxury and formality, but the tension between them quickly arose. She, used to dealing with demanding clients, was not easily intimidated. He, in turn, was not prepared for someone who didn't bow to the power associated with his last name. Still, there was something in Lauren's firmness, in the way she handled everything with competence and passion, that caught his attention. And, while Lauren tried to stay focused on the work, ignoring the unsettling magnetism of that man, Connor began to realize that perhaps he had found someone capable of seeing him beyond appearances. Someone who, without even trying, threatened to break down the walls he had spent his entire life building. The first significant encounter between Lauren and Connor happened amidst the bustle of final preparations for the luxurious wedding she was organizing. The mansion chosen as the venue for the event was an imposing structure, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens and architecture that exuded opulence. Every detail of that setting reflected the extravagance of the family involved, but for Lauren, it was just another job, a job that required perfection. As she supervised the setup of the decorations, adjusting details with the meticulous attention that characterized her, Connor arrived. His presence did not go unnoticed. He carried that air of silent authority, a natural confidence that came not only from wealth, but from a posture that was always contained and controlled. Unlike the other family members, who seemed to thrive on the ostentation around them, Connor remained distant, almost out of place, as if that world did not fully belong to him. It was in this contrast that their differences began to stand out. Lauren, practical and focused, moved through the space with tireless determination, solving problems and ensuring that everything went according to plan. Connor, on the other hand, observed. He seemed more like a spectator than an active participant in the celebration, keeping to the sidelines, not getting involved. When they finally crossed paths, there were no formal introductions or unnecessary pleasantries. Lauren was adjusting the table arrangements when she noticed his presence, and it was impossible to ignore it. But unlike the impact he usually had on people, her reaction was different. With no time for admiration, she simply acknowledged his presence with a brief nod before returning to her work. Connor was intrigued. He was used to being treated with deference, but Lauren didn't seem the least bit impressed by who he was, or by the power his last name carried. There was something in that direct and efficient demeanor that disarmed him, a confidence that did not depend on status or wealth. She moved with the assurance of someone who knew exactly their own worth, and that was something he rarely encountered. Throughout that day, their interactions were brief but memorable. Lauren, always professional, did not hesitate to give instructions or make adjustments, treating him as just another element in the complexity of the event. Connor, in turn, observed every gesture she made, fascinated by the evident passion with which she performed her role, and while she saw him as just another demanding client, though notably reserved, Connor began to realize that Lauren represented something he hadn't known he was searching for, a rare authenticity in a world of appearances. It was in that first meeting, between discreet glances and the silent tension of two such different people, that the first sparks were ignited, though neither of them was willing to admit it. For Connor, the attraction to Lauren didn't happen abruptly, but grew in a subtle, almost imperceptible way. After that first meeting, amidst the organization of the luxurious wedding, he began to observe her more closely, not out of fleeting curiosity, but from a genuine interest he couldn't yet explain. Little by little, he noticed nuances that intrigued him. There was a lightness to Lauren, even in the midst of chaos. She handled unexpected problems with determined calm, finding quick solutions without losing her composure. Her commitment to perfection never seemed like a burden. On the contrary, she showed an evident pleasure in doing her job well. But it wasn't just her efficiency that impressed him. It was the way she stayed true to herself, not letting the expectations of that environment full of ostentation shape her. While everyone around seemed driven by the need to impress or assert themselves, Lauren remained centered, with a quiet confidence that didn't require external validation. Connor started paying attention to details, the way she treated every member of the team with respect, without distinctions. The way her laughter, when it came, was spontaneous and sincere, a rare sound in that world of formalities. And above all, the passion she put into every aspect of her work, turning the ordinary into something extraordinary. There were moments when he caught himself searching for her presence without realizing it. During meetings or site visits, his eyes would automatically look for her, drawn to that unique energy. He was surprised to notice how just seeing her, so focused and determined, could calm the constant restlessness he carried. Connor also began to notice something even rarer: Lauren's freedom. She didn't seem bound by the shackles of family expectations or social obligations. Her life was shaped by her own choices, not by the need to meet others' desires, a freedom he had never known but now longed for deeply. And as this admiration grew, Connor realized that Lauren's presence was starting to affect him in unexpected ways. He felt lighter around her, more willing to question the conventions that had always guided his life. For the first time, he began to wonder if the path laid out for him was really the one he wanted to follow. This fascination wasn't just physical or superficial. It was a deep admiration for Lauren's strength, authenticity, and passion. And the more he got to know her, the more certain he became that she represented everything he had always sought, even if he had only just realized it. Lauren began to notice something was changing within her, something she couldn't control. In the early days of being around Connor, her focus had been entirely professional. She saw him as just another member of a rich and powerful family, and his presence was simply a detail to be ignored while she gave her best to organize the event. But as the days passed, Lauren noticed her thoughts drifting to him more often than she'd like to admit. She wasn't the type to be carried away by momentary attraction. She had always been a practical woman, focused on her career, putting her own dreams ahead of any distractions. But when faced with the softness behind Connor's reserved demeanor, something began to stir within her, a curiosity, an attraction she couldn't simply ignore. It was his gaze, deep and attentive, that seemed to see beyond the surface, catching every movement of hers as if he had a genuine interest in her as a person, not just in the work she was doing. This began to unsettle her. Lauren was used to being seen as a competent professional, but no one had ever looked at her that way, not with a mix of admiration and a subtle search for something more. She also noticed how he acted in moments of discomfort, as if he knew how to hide his own insecurities with impeccable control, but never showing arrogance. It was something rare among the people in the social circle she was used to. Among so many imposing and conventional figures, Connor was different. He didn't impose himself, but at the same time, he exuded a calmness that made her feel at ease around him. Something in her began to open to him, without her even realizing it. Over time, Lauren found herself eagerly awaiting the moments when he appeared, as if there was a sense of anticipation in the air every time he crossed the door. She tried to stay focused, but something inside her betrayed her, making his presence a bit hard to ignore. When he smiled, even if just a little, she felt a wave of warmth spread through her body, and that sensation made her question why him, among so many others, had this effect on her. It was clear to her that the differences between them were immense, almost insurmountable. She came from a simple world, where working hard was the only way to achieve something. Connor, on the other hand, seemed like someone who had everything he wanted within reach, without even trying. She knew that any involvement with him would probably be a mistake, but somehow, the attraction to his presence kept growing. She tried to focus on other things, on wedding tasks and the details that needed her attention, but the thought of him, that subtle energy he emitted, stayed in the back of her mind, like soft music playing in the background. And the more she tried to ignore him, the more she felt his presence. It was at this moment that Lauren realized she was starting to let herself be carried away, something that had never happened to her. She had always believed that work should be her priority, but upon seeing Connor again, observing her from a distance with a look of genuine interest, she couldn't help but feel the desire to get to know him better grow stronger. She knew this attraction was risky, but for some reason, she couldn't pull away. Something in her longed to explore this feeling, something she had never experienced with such intensity before. Connor, with his silence and his way of seeing the world, seemed to be drawing her into territory she never imagined she would dare enter. It was a cold autumn night, and the wedding event Lauren was organizing had ended. After weeks of hard work, she could finally breathe. The soft lights in the hall were now off, and the atmosphere was one of relaxation, but also of a certain emptiness. The space that had once been filled with guests and laughter now felt vast and silent. Lauren stayed behind, organizing a few final details, when she realized that Connor was still there, watching her from a distance. He, as always, was apart, but tonight he seemed different. His eyes followed Lauren, as if he couldn't completely pull away. He knew there was something about her that attracted him uniquely, something he couldn't explain. It wasn't just her physical beauty, but the quiet, yet intense energy she radiated. The passion with which she took care of every detail, the way she illuminated any room with her presence was fascinating. Connor approached with cautious steps, almost as if he were respecting a space between them that he wasn't sure whether to invade. But Lauren noticed his presence, and when she looked at him, she couldn't help but smile softly. Something had changed between them in the past few days. The feeling of being near Connor no longer caused discomfort. On the contrary, there was a sense of anticipation in the air, something both of them were beginning to notice, but neither dared to explore. She walked toward him, unsure of what to say. Words weren't necessary. The connection was already there, ready to be recognized. "I thought you were going to leave," Lauren said, her tone light, but carrying a silent tension. Connor smiled, a softer smile than she was used to seeing. "I wanted to stay a little longer. I think I was waiting for you to finish." The way he said this made Lauren's heart beat faster. She didn't know exactly what was between them, but she felt something strong, something growing with every look, with every word. But there was an internal conflict, a fear she couldn't ignore. She tried to rationalize, telling herself that nothing should happen between them. She was focused on her work. She shouldn't get involved in anything that could be complicated. But Connor didn't seem willing to accept the distance she was trying to create. He stepped closer, until they were just a step away. Lauren felt his breath almost on her skin, and for a moment, all she thought about was how easy it would be to let him in. And then, without giving her time to fully process the situation, Connor stepped forward and with a simple yet meaningful gesture, touched her face. It was a light touch, almost a whisper of affection, but enough for Lauren to feel the electricity in the air. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to stop for a second. "Lauren," he said softly, his voice gentle, as if trying to capture her attention, as if he wanted her to hear him right then, and only at that moment. "You make me feel like I'm in a place where I shouldn't be, where everything I want most seems both wrong and right at the same time." She stood there, motionless, her eyes locked on his. He was talking about something she didn't know if she should believe, but the truth was, she felt it too. Their connection was intense, but also filled with complexity. They came from such different worlds, and Lauren knew that something as simple as a gesture of affection could change everything between them. But before she could respond, Connor leaned slightly forward, in a natural and delicate manner, and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, almost as if asking for permission, more like a silent promise than anything else. Connor's lips were gentle, but there was something undeniable about them. When they pulled away, Lauren was stunned, her thoughts swirling in her head. She didn't know what to do with it, but the truth was, she couldn't deny what she felt. The kiss was brief, but intense, and both of them felt that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. However, as the universe often has a strange way of balancing things, right after the kiss, a deep voice interrupted the moment. It was Lauren's phone. She looked at the screen and saw it was a call from her colleague. With a sigh, she answered, and the two of them slowly pulled apart, aware that there was something at stake, something beyond their understanding. But as they pulled away, the silence between them spoke louder than any words. Both knew they were on the brink of something bigger, something that, until then, had seemed unattainable. But before the new chapter of their lives could truly begin, a shadow loomed over them, the shadow of the expectation for a different life, something they couldn't yet understand. The truth had settled between them, heavier than any word spoken. The kiss they shared, the flame that seemed to grow with each encounter, could no longer be ignored. What they had begun to experience together was no longer simple, no longer a chance meeting of two souls. It was a path unfolding ahead of them, a winding road full of obstacles. They both knew this, but what made them different was that, until that moment, neither of them seemed willing to set aside what fate seemed to have reserved for them. Connor knew his life was about to change, but it wasn't just about what he wanted. It was about what his family expected of him. His father, Gerald's empire, wasn't built on dreams and passions. It was a solid, cold structure, deeply rooted in tradition. Gerald, a man who always knew what he wanted, saw no reason for anything that deviated from the continuity plan he had orchestrated for his son's future. The power, the business, the family reputation, these were all ahead of anything personal or emotional. And as much as Connor tried to distance himself from this legacy, he always found himself pulled back. That evening, when the news of an arranged marriage reached him, something inside Connor broke. It was as clear as daylight. His father had chosen a young woman from high society, someone who, in his mind, was the ideal person to unite forces and keep the family empire intact. There was no room for Lauren in his plans. His father would never accept someone like her. And as cruel as it seemed, Gerald believed he was doing what was best for everyone's future. Connor was in his office, looking out the window, lost in his own thoughts when the door opened. Gerald entered, with his usual firm step, the expression of someone who controlled the world around him. Without saying a word, he handed Connor a document. It was the marriage contract. What hurt the most was the impersonal way Gerald gave it to him, as if it were something trivial, just another task to be completed. "This is the way," Gerald said, with a firmness that left no room for discussion. "She is the right person. She has everything our family needs." Connor looked at the contract, the pain growing in his chest. He knew what it meant. The end of everything he had dreamed for himself. It wasn't a choice. It was an imposition. His family's life, the weight of tradition, all of that was about to be placed above any personal desire he had. And he knew that if he said no, he would face his father's wrath. It could mean the end of what he loved most, the family legacy, his father's acceptance. But it also meant the end of what he feared most, losing Lauren's love. On the other hand, Lauren also found herself in a dilemma. The life she led seemed simple and genuine, and she never dreamed her path would cross with someone like Connor. She was, in many ways, a self-taught woman. Her work as an event planner was her passion, and she knew there was much to accomplish. She felt fulfilled when taking care of the details, when making the impossible happen. But when Connor entered her life, he brought with him a whirlwind of emotions and expectations that she didn't know how to handle. Lauren had always known the difference between her and Connor was immense. He belonged to a world she could barely comprehend, and she was just an ordinary woman, with her feet on the ground and her heart beating for a simpler future. She didn't want to be just an ornament, a character in a life that didn't belong to her. Yet, the attraction to him was undeniable. His kindness, his care, the way he saw the world and cared for her, made her question everything she believed about life and love. But fear was there too. The fear that, as much as she felt drawn to Connor, she was heading down a path where the cost would be higher than she could pay. What would happen to her when her family's expectations and social pressure crushed her? She couldn't go against everything she had built so far, everything that represented her independence. She didn't know if she would be able to survive the pressure of being the woman Connor desired, of not being enough to endure everything that would mean. In the weeks that followed, the two of them were immersed in a sea of conflicting emotions. Connor tried to escape his father's pressure, but with each step he took, he felt the chains tighten around him. He knew he would have to make a decision, and that decision would involve a difficult choice: continue living the life his father had prepared for him, or follow his heart and risk everything for Lauren. Meanwhile, Lauren kept drifting further away from Connor, not knowing how to deal with the situation. What he wanted from her was something she couldn't offer without losing her own identity. She tried to focus on her work, but Connor's thoughts never left her. The moments they spent together were etched in her mind, but the reality of what she would face by his side was something she didn't know if she could bear. The space between them began to grow, as if fear and doubt were turning into invisible walls. But deep down, they both knew they were on the brink of something big, and the fear of what they would lose if they chose the wrong path was palpable. For Lauren, the risk of giving up her freedom was terrifying, and for Connor, the risk of losing true love was consuming him. Connor, amidst the confusion of thoughts about taking on a facade marriage just to keep the family empire intact, and the destiny his father had prepared or following his heart, finally decides to take action in the middle of this conflict. Gerald's office was immersed in an oppressive stillness, the heavy curtains drawn, as if the very environment was absorbing the tension of the moment. Connor stood, his posture upright, but his eyes carried the determination of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. The silence between him and his father stretched on, tense and heavy with a weight that seemed too immense for the space they were in. Gerald was sitting behind his large mahogany desk, his fingers interlaced as if the battle unfolding was just another small obstacle to be overcome. But for Connor, this was the final confrontation. It wasn't just about discussing a marriage contract or obeying his father's wishes. It was a fight for his own freedom, for the chance to choose his path, his happiness. His father looked at him, his gaze firm and impassive, as always. There was no trace of doubt or vulnerability. Gerald knew exactly what he wanted and believed he was doing what was best for his son, even if it meant imposing a destiny he would never choose. "You're throwing everything away, Connor," Gerald said, his voice low but carrying a cutting coldness. "You know what's at stake here. The future of our family, the empire we've built. You can't be this impulsive. She's not the right person for you. She doesn't belong to our world." Connor felt the anger rising within him, a mix of frustration and desperation. It was the same old story, the same speech, as if he were incapable of thinking for himself, but it wasn't like that anymore. He knew what he wanted, and for the first time, he wasn't willing to back down. "I'm not going down this path, Dad. No matter what you say or what you plan for me, I can't live a lie. I can't be trapped in a life that's not mine. I chose Lauren. She's the only thing that makes me feel truly alive." Connor's words were firm, but the weight of them almost suffocated him. He felt the burden of all the expectations his father had placed on his shoulders. But now, he knew he couldn't be the perfect son, the successor his father had envisioned. He wasn't that man. And finally, he was ready to fight for it. Gerald stood up slowly, his expression unchanged, but the tension in the air was palpable. He stepped closer to Connor, and for a moment, the silence between them became unbearable. "You're making a mistake, Connor," Gerald said, his voice deeper now. "This romance with her, it's no longer a youthful whim. It's not going to work. You need to understand that." Connor looked at him, his gaze intense, filled with a strength he had never had before. "I know what I need, and I'm not you. I'm not your reflection." The words echoed in the space between them, and for the first time, Gerald seemed to hesitate. But soon, the mask of control returned to his face. He sighed, aware that he could no longer persuade his son with old tactics. "Do whatever you want," Gerald said, his tone now more tired, as if he were exhausted from the fight. "But know this, if you go down this path, you'll be alone. There's no place for you in our family if you choose this." Connor fell silent, feeling the weight of the decision he had just made. He knew what it meant. He knew his choice was irreversible. But looking at his father, something within him solidified. The feeling of being free, of finally being in control of his own life, filled his chest. He was no longer willing to live to please someone who could never understand his true essence. "I know what I'm doing," Connor replied, his voice now softer, but as firm as a rock. "And I won't regret it." Without saying another word, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving behind a father who, despite his authority, could no longer stop his son from following his own path. When the door closed behind him, the house seemed quieter than ever, but Connor knew that despite all the turmoil, he had made the right decision. He was ready to fight for his future with Lauren, no matter the cost. And now, nothing would stop him. After the confrontation between Connor and his father, the tension that hung over Lauren and Connor intensified. Despite her love for him, Lauren felt that, with every deeper step she took in her relationship with Connor, she was drifting away from everything she had built up to that point. The independence that had always been her greatest value seemed to slip through her fingers, and the pressure to fit into his world, so distant from hers, began to suffocate her. She tried, at all costs, to distance herself from him, but the bond between them was growing stronger. The desire to be with Connor was undeniable, but the fear of losing her identity, of becoming the billionaire's woman, made her hesitate. With every touch from Connor, every look filled with promises, she wondered if she could bear a life beside him without losing what she cherished most. And so, she pulled away, as if the physical space between them was the only way to keep her heart from getting completely lost. The nights became long and empty. Lauren was alone, but she felt she had made the right decision, even though the pain of being away from Connor consumed her. The unexpected event happened suddenly. During an important event, Lauren and Connor crossed paths again. She wasn't prepared for the impact of seeing him there, so close, so immersed in his world. But there was something different in Connor's eyes, something more intense, more decisive. He found her in the middle of the crowd, their eyes meeting for a brief moment, and in that instant, the world around them seemed to disappear. Connor didn't want to wait any longer. The pain of having lost her, even if temporarily, was unbearable. He knew there was no going back for him. His heart didn't belong to his father's empire or to the rules that surrounded him. It belonged to Lauren. With a resolute expression, he approached Lauren, saying nothing, gently taking her hand, as if he were holding it to never let go. The gesture was simple, but it carried an emotional intensity that she couldn't ignore. The moment Connor's fingers touched Lauren's skin, something inside her broke, and she knew, without a doubt, that she could no longer continue living with the fear that haunted her. "Lauren, I can't live without you," he said, his voice firm, but filled with emotion. "I won't let anything tear us apart. I need you, more than anything." Time seemed suspended as Connor's words echoed in Lauren's mind. She felt her heart race, blood pulsing through her veins, as a wave of conflicting emotions overtook her body. Fear, doubt, everything seemed to crumble in front of what she had feared the most, but also desired with all her soul. She knew what he was asking. It wasn't just a proposal. It was a surrender, a choice for life, a deep commitment that defied the expectations and conventions she had always followed. But at that moment, something inside her shifted. She realized that she didn't want to live with the weight of insecurities anymore, with the pain of not living the life she dreamed of by his side. Tears formed in her eyes, not from fear, but from a deep sense of surrender. It wasn't just the love for Connor she felt, but the acceptance of herself, the ability to embrace everything he represented, without losing her essence. And by doing that, she knew she was also embracing her true self. She looked at Connor, and a soft smile formed on her lips. "I've accepted my fear, Connor," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "And now, I accept you." He smiled, a smile that lit up his entire being, and with a simple gesture, but filled with meaning, he embraced her. That was the final decision. They were together, ready to face any obstacle that came their way, but knowing that the true strength lay in their union. Lauren and Connor's love wasn't built around a fairy tale, but on overcoming fears, on the brave choice to follow their own desires, instead of giving in to imposed expectations. They learned that for love to be true, It was necessary to break free from the ghosts of the past, the insecurities, and the fears that kept them from their true happiness. The message their story left for everyone was clear. Love isn't about perfection, but about commitment, courage, and surrender. True love requires strength to face challenges, but also vulnerability to allow oneself to love without restrictions. Lauren and Connor were no longer prisoners of their own limitations. Together, they had found a freedom they never imagined possible. True love, they learned, isn't bought or imposed. It's built, with patience, with challenges, but above all, with trust and an open heart.